Number 10. The rules that changed everything. In 1961, Formula One changed overnight. The governing body slashed maximum engine capacity from 2.5 litres down to 1.5. The British teams had fought this change for years. They lobbied against it. They argued it would ruin the sport. They lost. For teams like Cooper, BRM and Lotus, who had spent years perfecting their Coventry Climax 4-cylinder engines at the larger displacement, this was a disaster. They had nothing ready. Coventry Climax themselves had shown little enthusiasm for building a new small-capacity racing engine, and the British constructors had no alternative supplier. Their solution was to take the existing Climax FPF engine and simply shrink it down to meet the new limit. The Mark II version displaced 1,499.8 cubic centimeters and produced around 152 horsepower at close to 8,000 RPM. Adequate, but nothing more. Ferrari, on the other hand, had seen this coming. While the British teams were protesting the rule change, Enzo Ferrari had been quietly developing a 1.5-litre V6 engine in Formula 2 for 2 full years before the new regulations took effect. Ferrari ran their smaller engine in actual races throughout 1960, learning and refining while the opposition was still writing angry letters. When 1961 arrived, Ferrari had a purpose-built engine with thousands of racing miles on it, and the British had a compromise. The gap in preparation would define the entire season. Number 9. The Ferrari 156 Sharknose. The car Ferrari built around that engine was the 156, and it earned its nickname the moment people saw it. 2 angled air intakes on the nose gave it a predatory look that no other car on the grid could match. The name stuck immediately. Sharknose. Carlo Chitti, Ferrari's chief designer, set the V6 at a 120-degree angle between the cylinder banks. This was not just an aesthetic choice. A conventional 60-degree or 90-degree V6 sits taller in the chassis. By spreading the cylinders wider, Chitti lowered the entire engine's center of gravity, which improved the car's balance through corners. Every 120 degrees of crankshaft rotation produced a power pulse, giving the engine an unusually smooth power delivery. The engine itself produced around 190 horsepower at 9,500 revolutions per minute, and it was actually lighter than the 4-cylinder Climax that the British teams were running. Ferrari had built an engine that made more power, weighed less, and sat lower in the car than anything the competition could offer. Ferrari entered 3 Sharknoses at Monaco. Phil Hill, the quiet American who would go on to win the championship that year. Wolfgang von Trips, the German aristocrat who was the other title favourite and would tragically be killed at Monza later that season. And Richie Ginther, the young Californian who had just joined the team and received the newest version of the car with the latest 120-degree engine, while Hill and von Trips ran the older 65-degree units. 3 factory cars, 3 professional drivers, full factory support from Maranello. Against them, a single privateer in a year-old car. Number 8. The Lotus 18. Colin Chapman designed the Lotus 18 in 1959, and by the standards of its day, it was a revelation. The space-frame chassis was built from heavily triangulated steel tubes, and the entire car weighed under 1,000 pounds in its original 2.5-litre form. The body panels were lightweight aluminium bolted directly to the frame rather than being structurally integrated. Chapman's entire philosophy was built on one principle: ADD lightness. Where other designers added material for strength, Chapman took it away for speed. The fuel tank sat above the driver's knees. The suspension used double wishbones at the front with inboard coilover units, keeping unsprung weight to a minimum. Everything was pared back to the absolute essentials. The car had already given Lotus its first ever Formula One victory when Stirling Moss won the 1960 Monaco Grand Prix in Rob Walker's example. It had been competitive at the larger engine capacity. The problem was that by 1961 it was a year old. Lotus had already built its replacement, the sleeker Lotus 21, which Jim Clark would drive at Monaco as a works entry. The Lotus 18 that Moss would race was a customer car, modified to accept the smaller 1.5-litre engine, running on a chassis designed for a bigger, more powerful unit. It used a Calotti gearbox rather than the Lotus sequential unit, Girling disc brakes and Dunlop tyres. It produced 152 horsepower. The Ferraris had 190. That gap, roughly 25% more power in the Ferrari, would be impossible to overcome on any circuit with long straights. Monaco, with its tight corners and short bursts of acceleration, was the one place on the calendar where the Lotus had a chance. Moss knew this. Everyone knew this. Number 7. The man who turned down Ferrari. Stirling Moss was already the most famous racing driver in Britain by 1961. He had won 16 championship Grand Prix races across 5 different constructors, a record of versatility that no other driver could match. He had finished second in the World Championship 4 consecutive years from 1955 to 1958, racing racing Juan Manuel Fangio in 3 of those seasons. In 1958, he lost the title to Mike Hawthorn by a single point, and the reason he lost it tells you everything about who Moss was as a person. At the Portuguese Grand Prix that year, Hawthorn was facing disqualification for pushing his car against the direction of the track after a spin. The stewards were ready to strip him of his second-place finish. Moss, who had won the race, walked into the stewards' room and testified that Hawthorn had pushed his car on the pavement, not the racing surface, and that he had not interfered with any other competitor. The stewards reversed their decision. Hawthorn kept his 6 points. At the end of the season, Hawthorn won the championship by a single point over Moss, the point that Moss's own honesty had preserved. By 1961, he was widely considered the greatest driver in the world. Ferrari wanted him. Several factory teams wanted him. Moss chose to stay with Rob Walker's private team, a decision that baffled the paddock, but made perfect sense to Moss. He valued loyalty and independence over the politics of a factory operation. Number 6. Rob Walker and the Gentleman Racer. Rob Walker was the heir to the Johnny Walker whiskey fortune, and he used that money to run the most successful private racing team in Formula One history. Walker's cars were painted dark blue with a white nose stripe, and between 1958 and 1961, Moss won 7 championship races in Walker's machinery. No other privateer has come close to that record. Walker ran his team from a garage in Pipbrook near Dorking in Surrey. There was no factory, no wind tunnel, no team of engineers writing simulations. Walker had his chief mechanic Alf Francis, a small crew, and a driver who could extract performance that the car had no right to deliver. The relationship between Walker and Moss was built on trust and mutual respect, and it produced results that embarrassed far wealthier operations. For Monaco in 1961, Walker's Lotus 18 was the car. There was no backup plan. There was no second driver, just one car, one driver, and the knowledge that the Ferraris would be faster in a straight line on every single lap. Number 5. The cracked chassis. On race morning, the temperature in Monaco was climbing. It was going to be a scorching day on the Côte d'Azur, and the race would last close to 3 hours. The mechanics had already decided to remove the side body panels from the Lotus to help cool the cockpit, a move that would leave Moss exposed from the waist down, with nothing between him and the Monaco barriers but open air. Then Alf Francis found the crack. It was in one of the chassis tubes. The space frame that Chapman had designed to be light and rigid had developed a fracture, and it was sitting right next to the fuel tank, which was full of petrol. A structural failure in a space frame chassis is not a minor problem. The entire car depends on the triangulated tube network to maintain its rigidity. A cracked tube means a compromised structure, and a compromised structure at Monaco means a car that could fold around a barrier at any point during 100 laps of racing. In any normal circumstance, you would withdraw the car. You would not attempt to weld a steel tube inches from a tank full of racing fuel minutes before a Grand Prix. Francis draped wet cloths over the fuel tank, pulled out his oxyacetylene torch and welded the crack shut right there on the grid. The officials were not aware of the repair. The other teams were not aware of the repair. Moss sat in the car knowing that his chassis had just been welded together by a man crouching next to a full fuel tank with a blowtorch. If you are looking for a single image that captures what privateer racing meant in 1961, that is it. Number 4. Qualifying. Practice sessions had been difficult. Moss's engine was not running cleanly and the carburettor was causing problems. The night before final qualifying, Francis cornered the Weber carburettor representative and made him bring a brand new unit to the team's garage. They stripped both carburettors down completely and found a manufacturing defect in a groove inside the float chamber. The problem was fixed overnight. On Saturday afternoon, with the engine finally running properly, Moss produced one of those laps that defied explanation. 1 minute 39.1 seconds around the streets of Monte Carlo in a year-old car with 152 horsepower. Pole position. Richie Ginther, in the newest, most powerful Ferrari on the grid, was 0.2 of a second slower. Jim Clark, in the brand new works Lotus 21, was third. Phil Hill and Wolfgang von Trips completed the second row in their Ferraris. Moss had put the slowest car among the front-runners on pole position through sheer commitment. The question now was whether he could sustain that level of performance for 100 laps. Over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. If you are enjoying this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you know. Now, back to the race. Number 3, the first 50 laps. Louis Chiron dropped the flag and Ginther used the Ferrari's power advantage to rocket into the lead. Clark held second briefly before his fuel pump failed on the opening laps, forcing him to pit and dropping him out of contention. Moss was promoted to second behind the Ferrari, but Ginther was pulling away at an alarming rate. By the end of lap 3, the Ferrari was 5 seconds clear. Moss later admitted it took him several laps to find his rhythm that day, and Ginther's explosive early pace shocked him into it. Joe Bonnier in a Porsche had latched onto the back of Moss's Lotus, and the two of them began to close on the Ferrari together. By lap 14, Moss swept past Ginther at the gasworks hairpin. The tight right-hander where the Lotus's lighter weight and sharper turn-in cancelled out the Ferrari's straight-line advantage. Bonnier followed Moss through, pushing Ginther back to third. The Ferraris then began to reorganise. Phil Hill found his way past Bonnier and Ginther followed. Von Trips worked past the Porsche too. By quarter distance, lap 25, the order had settled. Moss led, Hill was second, Ginther third, Von Trips fourth. 3 Ferraris in formation behind a single Lotus, and Moss had built a 10-second lead in an underpowered car. On a circuit where every wall is a potential race-ending barrier, 10 seconds. The Ferraris were running as hard as they could, and they were falling behind. Number 2, the final 25 laps. At half distance, Moss still led by 8 seconds. By lap 60, the gap was down to 3 seconds. The Ferraris were coming. Phil Hill had been chasing hard but could not find a way past. He later said the frustration of that race was indescribable, busting himself and not being able to catch Moss no matter what he tried. Ginther had been shadowing his teammate for 30 laps, presumably under team orders to stay behind the more senior driver. On lap 75, Ferrari manager Romolo Tavoni ordered Hill to move aside. A pit board appeared for Ginther with a single word on it: faster. Ginther later said he found that message amusing. He did not know what else they thought he had been giving. With Hill out of the way, Ginther began his final assault. The gap came down. 4 seconds, 3 seconds. With 10 laps to go, Ginther was under 3 seconds behind the Lotus. Every lap, Ginther pushed harder. Every lap, Moss matched him. Both men were now lapping 3 seconds faster than their qualifying times, a level of performance over 100 laps that Motorsport magazine's correspondent Dennis Jenkinson called almost beyond belief. Moss's average lap time across the entire race was 1 minute 39.5 seconds. His pole position lap had been 1 minute 39.1 seconds. He had sustained qualifying pace for nearly 3 hours in scorching heat in a car with no side panels over a chassis that had been welded together that morning. All round that last lap, Moss was watching his mirrors. He later admitted he spent the entire race convinced the Ferraris were just biding their time, swapping positions behind him for fun, waiting to blast past on the final lap. He had no idea they were getting frantic pit signals because they genuinely could not catch him. Number 1, 3.6 seconds. Moss crossed the line 3.6 seconds ahead of Ginther. Phil Hill finished 3rd. Von Trips finished 4th. 3 factory Ferraris, all running, all driven flat out, all beaten by one man in one outdated car. Ginther climbed from his cockpit and said it was the best race he ever drove. When someone told him that Moss had called it his finest too, Ginther said he felt incredibly proud. Phil Hill was less diplomatic. He said he would have swapped some of the Ferrari's horsepower for the handling of that Lotus. Moss's victory at Monaco in 1961 bought the British teams exactly one race. Ferrari went on to win 5 of the remaining 7 rounds that season. Phil Hill took the championship, though the title was overshadowed by the death of Von Trips at Monza, where his Ferrari crashed into spectators and killed 15 people alongside the driver. Moss would finish 3rd in the championship for the 3rd consecutive year. He won one more Grand Prix that season at the Nürburgring in treacherous wet conditions, again in the Lotus 18, again against the Ferraris. The rain neutralized the power advantage and gave Moss another stage on which to demonstrate what he could do with an inferior car on a circuit that rewarded bravery and precision above all else. Those 2 victories, Monaco and the Nürburgring, were the only races all season that Ferrari did not win. The following April, at Goodwood, Moss crashed a Lotus during the Glover Trophy and suffered severe head injuries. The cause of the accident was never fully explained. He was 32 years old. He spent a year recovering, and when he returned to test at an empty Goodwood, his lap times were reasonable. But something had changed. The reflexes he trusted absolutely were a fraction slower than before. He retired from professional racing. He had won 212 of the 529 races he entered across every discipline of motorsport: Formula One, sports cars, touring cars, rallying. He had won Grand Prix races for 5 different constructors, a record of versatility that speaks to pure talent rather than the machinery. He had never been world champion. Years later, someone asked him if that bothered him. Moss said he would rather be remembered as the driver who should have won and never did, than as just another name on the list. Some pretty average drivers have won it once, he said. He wanted to be remembered for what he could do in a racing car, not for what the points table said. British police officers who pulled over speeding motorists had a standard line for decades. "Who do you think you are, Stirling Moss?" His name became the definition of speed itself in the British language. And Monaco 1961 is the reason why. 1 car, 1 driver, 100 laps, 3.6 seconds. The greatest drive Formula One has ever seen. If you found this one worth watching, subscribe. We will see you in the next one.